Batu, Barada, Nikto.
You must remember those words.
Gordon's alive.
You know what the Turing test is?
I know Kung Fu.
Dead or alive, you are coming with me.
My God, it's full of stars.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Stories Out of Time and Space. This is our second episode. So 2 episodes in. The first episode we went back to 1950s and we did Forbidden Planet. And we're jumping forward now to the 1970s, early 1970s, and we're actually moving away from American cinema and we're going to be jumping in to Russian cinema. So this is one of Julian's choices. And Julian, you're dropping us in it at the deep end with episode 2. We're talking about 1972's Solaris. Now, that name may ring a bell because there was a George Clooney remake in 2002. But we're going to be talking about the original Russian version. So let me just give you a quick synopsis. So some decades ago, a planet was found that was covered in a huge viscous ocean. It was found that the ocean responded to people's presence. A space station was set up with around 80 scientists to study the ocean and the planet. Years passed and only 3 scientists remain, but communication between the space station has been reduced to 0. In response, psychologist Chris Kelvin is being sent to investigate and report on what is going on. What he finds will change him forever. Now, Julian, do you think that's a fair assessment of the plot?
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment of the setup. I think that some things depend on what translation you're working with. And part of the setup is that Chris Calvin is trying to investigate this, and there's also been this weird encounter on Solaris with Burton, the pilot who goes searching for a missing pilot and sort of has this hallucination. And that was decades ago, right? So there is this kind of mystery. And the idea is that, so we found an alien planet. There seems to be something there, but it's been decades, and Solaris sticks, as they call the sort of study of this planet, basically hasn't advanced, hasn't produced anything. So there's this kind of mystery.
Yeah, it's a really interesting. I mean, the film itself is it sort of drops sort of certain information on the way, doesn't it? So it does open with I struggle. I should say, okay, let's clear a few things up from the beginning. So this is obviously the 1970. This is a Russian film. So I had an early English dub. I think I had the original dub. I got it off Amazon Prime. And so it's subtitled. And there are bits of information that you don't realise are key to the plot until later. That I had to make sure I'd read everything, so I had to go back and so I watched this in a couple of sittings just to make sure I got everything I could, because it's I think, as you sort of alluded to before, it's a film about mood and an experience, but again, there's sort of like there's some quite dense information that's going to come at you throughout the film, isn't there?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I do think, well, when I suggested this film and going into this, I did warn you, it is long. I mean, it's a Russian film from 1972. It is astoundingly influential. I'm sure we'll get into that. But it does feel long. It's slow. It's directed by Andrei Tarkovsky, based on a novel by Stanislaw Lem. Stanislaw Lem is renowned as a science fiction writer. In some circles, he is as much of a name as Philip K. Dick. And he was incredibly popular in Russia. He was a Polish author. Andrei Tarkovsky is a renowned Russian director. He also directed Stalker, which he likes better, and is also sci-fi, based on a Lem book. I like this better personally, but it is a Russian cinema, right? I mean, it is slow, and Andrei Tarkovsky is very known for these kind of slow, moody shots that are about sort of the composition of the scene, that let you kind of process what you're seeing. Um, but again, like, look, 2001 has a lot of long shots
Mm.
where your mind sort of is allowed to contemplate the vastness of this expanse, or the ship sort of isolated against the black of space, and ostensibly nothing's happening, but your mind is sort of invited to think, boy, they are really surrounded by a void that is waiting to kill them, um,
Yeah.
and I think in the same way this tries to create that.
Oh no, I agree. I actually think there are some scenes throughout that are actually incredibly successful at doing that. I think that there's and I was when I finished watching it, there were scenes early in the film that seemed to resonate more, which I found was like so. The film opens with Chris. He's on. He's at his. I think is it his uncle's cabin, sort of house.
Yeah,
And
I think so. I don't really remember.
yeah, and he's meeting with Burton, who's this pilot who, some decades before, had obviously worked on the space station and flown over the surface of the planet and seen all these things. Sort of, he describes seeing a garden with trees and plants sort of form out of the ocean, and then a 4 meter tall representation of a child, um, which is bizarre and sort of he's explaining this to almost like a government body.
Hmm.
Um, and you're seeing this as a video. It's sort of shown as a sort of a black and white video. He's been explained it. But you're obviously going around this house. But before that, like when you first meet Chris Kelvin as a character, he's a very. I couldn't help thinking of him as dour.
Hmm.
He's very sort of quiet. He's very sort of, and then when it rains quite heavily on him, he just sort of sits in it and sort of like quite literally soaks it in. And so it is very evocative of a mood. And I think it sort of sets the tone in that sort of thing. They're saying that Burton is ridiculed, and I'm just trying to set you up. I'm letting you know you are going to see you may see something weird, but this is what happened to me. And I don't know. It's an interesting opening to a film,
Yeah,
but
I think that I mean, let me see, the first shot is foliage, away
mm,
from Calvin, and the camera sort of slowly pans over to Calvin's feet. Um, and there are lots of shots early on of sort of like reeds in the water. There's lots of water shots. There's lots of nature and wet nature. And I think that early business. I mean, I think it's about 30 to 40 minutes. The first 30 or 40 minutes takes place on Earth prior to Calvin going to the Solaris station.
mm-hmm.
Um, and I think that is the slowest portion. I think that
Mm,
basically once he's on the Solaris station, I completely love the movie. I think that early bit, there's stuff that I like, and I actually found it was not as slow as I remembered. Um, there's a very famous scene where Burton is driving away, and the the camera follows him in his car, and there's it's maybe like 4 minutes or something of footage of him
no,
driving through this kind of
I
concrete
it's
landscape.
7.5. It's 7.5 minutes.
Okay. Well, I remembered it as I warned you, like there's like a
Yeah,
15-minute driving
yeah.
scene, and that was filmed in Tokyo, and
Mm,
um, and I think that it really gets across the sort of obviously Burton is upset. He is remembering what happened, and what's interesting there is that obviously 7 minutes is indulgent, right? But it's
mm.
this kind of concrete landscape, and everything in that stuff on Earth is very nature driven. And you were talking like Burton is very dour. He's very unemotional, um, and all of this is going to contrast with Solaris, where So on Solaris, everything is artificial. You're in a space station. So there's this big kind of dichotomy in the film between the nature of Earth and the artificiality, the kind of cloistered um, artificiality of the space station. And so that was really important for Tarkovsky. The novel, by the way, has nothing on Earth. It just begins with him going to the station. And Tarkovsky's early script, his first script, was like, 2/3 on Earth. And Tarkovsky was really interested in the Earth stuff and the human stuff, and he wanted to ground a sci-fi story in the human. And he complained that sci-fi movies are too obsessed with technology, and he wanted to do a sci-fi movie that had something to say and that explored characters who actually feel stuff and want to communicate what they're going through.
Which is interesting because I think he's not wrong. I mean, I get that notion of, because the opening scenes on Earth, the way they play out is very sort of open air. That all the windows are open. Very few scenes are feel claustrophobic. It feels like a very open area. They have a lot of conversations outside, and when they're inside, like I say, there are windows open. There's a lot of water and nature, like big plants. Like they'll see things in like big leaved plants in the corners or this other stuff. So it does stand in like absolute contrast to what feels a bit like a hamster run of a space station they get to later on. Like obviously all the whole thing's a donut, so it's like all the rings, all the sort of, and everything's made of plastic or metal. So that's a really good point. I can see that contrast. To talk about Burton's drive though, so I get around the greenery and the foliage and that sort of idea of expanse and Earth. And I also understand, like you say, when you actually see Burton in that drive scene, and you see that he's very tense, very pent up. He's clearly contemplating. He's had to sort of share this thing that's been like a burden for him for years. That I understand. But the minutes in that scene of just cars driving around, it goes on. Like you say, it definitely feels indulgent. I was looking through, and someone almost said, like, it almost feels like they've gone over to Tokyo and Osaka, and they've done this footage, and there's obviously been an expense to it, and they've gone, well, we've sort of got to justify us going there, so we better put it all in. That's the only reason.
I don't disagree with that. I mean, I think that's fair. I mean, I think to me, all the stuff on Earth, I don't know how long it is. I mean, it's somewhere between 30 minutes and 45 minutes. I think all that stuff could be cut by about half. I agree with you about the driving scene. I think it's a famous scene. I like it in ways, but I kind of have the same feeling that you do. And I think Tarkovsky is so in love with this nature. He's so in love with these lingering shots on foliage that personally, if there's any part of the movie that I would cut, it's the stuff on Earth. And I mean, Tarkovsky would shoot me for saying that, right? But I mean, there's enough setup there, right? I mean, I like Burton. Burton's also upset because one of the things he reveals to Kelvin is that baby that he saw, that weird hallucination, when he came back, he visited the widow of the pilot that he was searching for, and the pilot had a child who looked just like that child that he saw on Solaris. That was so. The implication is that ocean or whatever is on Solaris somehow was able to probe or see into the pilot's mind and didn't understand what it's seeing, doesn't fully understand scale, doesn't fully understand the human experience, but somehow reproduce this. That's kind of the implication, but Burton is kind of haunted by this. So I don't know. I mean, I agree. If there's stuff to cut, I would like to see, a good 15 minutes cut out of the Earth stuff.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, there's whole sections. There's a section where he has his son there, and they keep talking about his son, and there's a young girl there as well. And then they go see a horse, and
Yeah.
Chris Kelvin's aunt's there. And I was like, oh, okay, so this is going to be like, either have a short term payoff, like it's going to, mean something, or it's going to pay off at the end of the film or something. No, it means nothing. Like it's literally just there to show. It feels like they've chosen this location, and they've gone, oh, we've got stables out the back. Do you want to see the horse? Oh yeah, we can put a horse in the film. It's that thing of like
Yeah, I mean, I hear what you're saying.
concise storytelling versus get your mood across. I get, and some of the lingering shots are very good, but there's some bits that just feel indulgent and just padding, really.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a difference between indulgent and padding. I mean, it's stuff that I would cut, but I don't think Tarkovsky is intentionally making it longer. He did have a remit to, when the Russian state approved a movie, they would apparently approve a runtime along with it. So they approved this runtime. So, you did not have the freedom to, deviate from that. And in fact, he had to get past Russian censors and struggled with them. So I don't know. I mean, I think I definitely do think at times, wow, there are a lot of horses,
Yeah.
But I do think so. The horse is a non-human intelligence, right? That we're used to. That's an Earth other. The ocean on Solaris is an alien other. And the horse we have sort of conquered, sort of mastered, sort of tamed. We live in a kind of unity with it. Um, there's this whole thing throughout the movie about reason and the limits of reason, the limits of human civilization. And with the horse, it seems part of this bucolic scene. It's all nice, but the point seems to be to me that here's this other non-human intelligence that we can understand, and we have the confidence of those encounters to think that we can understand anything, right? I mean, through reason and science and civilization, we have, basically tamed the horse and live in this comfortable way. And none of that is possible on Solaris. Solaris defies civilization. It defies not just the natural order of that landscape in the beginning, but also human notions about what life is, about what we're capable of as a species. So, I mean, I guess that would be, I'm going all highfalutin, but I mean, there is enough of that I want the nature stuff in there. I want the horse in there. I agree, you could trim it.
Yeah. Okay. No, I can see what you mean, because again, I understand. Like you said, that I think like I said, when I finished the film, I went back and had a look at that opening shot, and the foliage it's actually sort of under a river, so there's obviously like flowing water, and then there's sort of the foliage underneath it, and as you sort of it pans up. And obviously, by the end of the film, you've learned that like water is so, or at least liquid, I suppose, is so intrinsic to this film. It's such a part of it. So that sort of film of sort of like water and life in that opening shot, it tells you everything. It's so it's sort of there. It's sort of what he's trying to get to. So I understand the need for that nature, and especially as well for the ending. It's sort of you need to have seen this cabin and understood sort of Chris Kelvin's sort of connection with it. But you're right. Yeah, I agree that this could be trimmed somewhat to be a little more concise. But
So let's get to Solaris. Let's get to
yes. I was going to say.
Solaris
So let's jump
mission,
forward
because,
to
I mean, so we're about 45 minutes in or something, and he being Kelvin gets to the Solaris station, and here we began about an hour and a half of what to me is just absolutely gripping, absolutely brilliant. I can't say how much I love everything from the arrival on the station on. Now, there are 3 people on the station instead of 80, right? Obviously,
yeah.
the station's fallen on hard times. Um, and I love that no one greets him. It's like so surreal. Like I'm on the station, no one greets him, and he's just wandering around the station. It's dilapidated, um, and he very quickly finds out. I mean, he passes a computer terminal that's sparking, and he
Yeah.
just disconnects it. It's like nobody cares that the equipment
That
is
I,
sparking.
I'm just
Go
going to
ahead.
focus on that, but yeah, because this was the thing that sort of struck me. That sort of, no, I agree. Actually, this is where the film picks up, and I actually did. There was a lot I enjoy in this sort of not the second half because the film actually has two parts. But
Right.
from the moment he gets onto Solaris, it does get a lot more interesting. But there's that moment, like I say, he's walking past a sparking, like computer unit or something, and he just pulls the wires out, and I'm thinking, you're in deep space. Stop messing with stuff. You're not you're not an astrophysicist. You don't know what it does. Leave it alone. If I stepped on top, I don't get in cars. If they look a little bit shaky or iffy, I'm not going to stay around on a space station if it looks and that it's a mess. I would definitely be a bit like, I'm not sure that this is the right. Should this really be still doing the job? But it's a
Yeah, I
good
mean, I
atmosphere. It holds a good. It's a good intro to the location.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm not bothered by that computer bit. I mean, I think the idea, he sort of like looks at it like, what the hell is this? And just
Mm.
sort of, pulls a wire to disconnect it. Um, it's not really clear what that computer does. And Kelvin seems to be at this point the sort of rational man of action. Who's just like, oh, this is sparking, like these incompetents haven't dealt with this. I'll pull it out. But I mean, it really does set the mood of this dilapidated station, which is exactly the opposite of 2001. Is
Mm.
exactly the opposite of Forbidden Planet. It's the opposite of everything we've ever gotten in mainstream sci-fi by 72. That which is all super clean, super optimistic about the future. Um, and I wanted to say that Star Wars, which we're going to be talking about next episode, gets a lot of credit for sort of inventing or codifying the idea, the used future idea, right? The idea that these spaceships are going to look lived in, right? It's going
Mm.
to look like that TIE fighter has flown around. Yeah. Lucas didn't invent that. Solaris does that, to the max. And I think that, when we talk about Alien, like Alien gets a lot of credit for that used future thing. I think Solaris does a better job than either of those movies. I love this dilapidated space station, which is again, as you say, like is a donut and it's brilliant design. You think about how these Russians built this, uh, and got it on film, and it sort of rivals 2001.
Yeah, I think the design in this is I really do like I say from the moment he arrives and they've got that sort of like I don't know, it's almost like a docking station, like a pod bay. He's in there and he walks through it all, and it does feel like um, this is something that whoever kicked it off, or you're sort of assuming, I'd assume it's like the Russian government or whatever they've got is almost forgotten about this. It's almost become a burden to them. It's almost like, go just figure out what the hell's going on so we can shut this thing down. It's well past its prime, and I love the fact that um, the three scientists that remain on there, like you say, they aren't there to keep it clean. It is just like they're there because when you find them, they are so obsessed with their or the life god, their research or whatever. That their environment and living conditions are really secondary to them, to everything else, and it shows. Like there's the corridors are filled with technology and sort of litter, and when you see sort of it's one of the scientists Snout, when you see his sort of living quarters and stuff, again they're sort of so disheveled and
Yeah.
everything. I really liked it, and again I said that bit I was really into because okay, this is where it's gonna kick up again. I actually quite enjoyed as he walked around that around all those living quarters and stuff.
Yeah, it's so surreal just seeing him wander through the station.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that yeah, I mean the station's fallen on hard times, but also um, those three scientists who remain have been affected by what's happening, right?
Mm.
And as he finds, uh, as he encounters those three scientists, again, it's so fascinating. The both Snout and Sartorius seem um, totally uninterested in him.
Yeah.
Like it's a visitor to the space, and they're like, look, we're crazy, right? I mean,
Yeah.
we have things we're dealing with. You don't know what's happening here. We know what's happening here. We're used to it. Uh, you're gonna figure it out, And they sort of warn him, but they seem so disinterested. It's so surprising, and very quickly he finds Jabarian, who is the one on the station who he knows has killed himself.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
and left a video for him. So, I mean, again, he arrives at the space station with 3 people instead of 80. It's all disheveled. The guy who he knows has killed himself, and the other 2 are totally uninterested in him.
It is.
And
It's.
seem sort of disheveled. It's so amazing to me.
It is, and I have to admit, there's the way the characters are introduced. Again, it's really like you say the 3 remaining scientists each get their own introduction. So you meet Snout in his sort of his quarters, and they're all disheveled. And again, like you say, there's that sort of like, oh, so you must be, you're Kelvin, so you're coming. He's like, yeah, but it is that sort of thing of like, it is literally meh. We heard you were coming. Makes no difference to us. So he's actually the most welcoming, to be fair. And he's like you say, is a bit sort of like shoulder shrugging. Meh. So you're right. You get Snout, Sartorius, and Jabbar. Is it Jabbarin? Yeah.
Yeah,
And
I think so.
Snout almost becomes your sort of like entry point into the station. He almost becomes like a little bit of exposition. He's like, okay, well, here's the thing that's going to happen. So he's like, beware of Sartorius. He's a bit of a moody git. When you meet Sartorius, he sort of knocks on his door and he's sort of like, I'm here. I've been sent to see you. And he sort of pops his head out and he's like, what do you want? He's like, oh, I've come from Earth. And you can just see he's like, I don't care. Go away. I'm busy. And what he's busy with, I have got questions about, and I think I get it. So one of the things we should say is there's a phenomena where the planet is somehow projecting what they call guests, which is a physical manifestation of something that is pulled from from an individual's mind. So it takes sort of an image or something from someone's mind, and it creates it in a physical way. And Chris Kelvin eventually meets one of these guests, and that's sort of the gist of the story. It's his past wife. But Sartorius, when you first meet him, a little person runs out, gets picked up and put back in. And all I can think of is, what was he thinking about to get that?
Now, is it a little person or is it a child?
I don't know. I assumed it was a little person just from that move, but it could be a child. I don't know. It's like you learn the least about him, don't you? Really?
Right. Yeah, and you don't really. I mean, I feel you don't really learn a lot about the other two's guests.
Mm.
I do feel like I mean, I would love if somebody made a sort of sidequel to this about the experiences of those other 2, sort of Rashomon style, what they went through
Mm.
as Kelvin arrived, and I mean, obviously, like who is that? Who is that? Yeah, I assume it's a child. It seems to me as if Sartorius, he says like, oh no, it's clear he does not want
Yeah.
Kelvin, who's there to investigate, to come in and see his quarters and see what's going on. And it seems to me that he uh, is there with a child, and that maybe it's a child that he had on Earth. Maybe that child is grown up, estranged from him, dead. We don't know. But that's kind of what I guess from that. And the child is like, pay attention to me, pay attention to me. And you find out later that the guests, because they, have been created essentially to communicate,
Mm.
right, with these astronauts, these scientists on the station, that they are sort of obsessed with the person whose consciousness they came from. So it seems as if that child, is banging on the door and eventually breaks free. And, and very quickly, Kelvin sees this woman wandering the corridors, and it's like, okay, nobody's interested in me.
Yeah.
They treat me with disdain. And there are 3 people on the station. The only one I know is dead. But then why are there these other people on this? And this is so bizarre.
Well, there's the thing. There's the two things. You one of the things is, like you say, it's almost comedic. It reminded me of it almost reminded me of like Reanimator, like Jeffrey Combs sort of like pulling a door closed behind him, like don't go in there, nothing in there, don't worry about it, and the door just banging away behind him in some sort of like comedy horror fashion because he's trying to hide something. But later on, you sort of when you find out about Kelvin's guests, and one of them like literally, well, we'll go into it, but she literally breaks through a door to be with him.
Yeah.
And there's almost this notion of like, if they're not being observed by the person they're there to see, then they don't exist. Like this, so you can sort of see like this when Sartorius steps out, there's almost like like you say, the child, whatever, he's banging at that door to be seen and to be recognized and to be given attention. It's a really sort of it's bizarre. But the other thing is as well, so this is where you first get to see Kelvin's, what you get to learn is Kelvin's guest, but he sees a woman walking around the space station and he starts to follow her. And eventually sort of she takes him to Jabarian's body, doesn't she?
Yes.
And I was wondering about like, was that intentional? Like, sort of, was that sort of this, was that the planet communicating with Chris almost like as a welcome? I don't know. It was weird. Just to me, it's sort of like, okay, there's something more to that. Like it wasn't an accident. It didn't feel coincidental. Like she went into that cold room on purpose, and he hadn't quite communicated with her yet. So he's obviously been thinking about Jabarian. So was that almost like I don't know, like an opening salvo, like a hello from the planet?
Yeah, I think it's something like that. I don't know. I don't know what's going on there. I think it's just sort of at that point. At that point, it's just mysterious.
Mm.
It's just sort of who is this? Now, I mean, I'm not, and it probably is the same actress who plays Hari, the dead wife, but I'm not convinced that it's necessarily the wife.
Oh,
I mean, it could be whoever Jabarian's guest was.
that's right. Yes. Because in his video, he actually has a woman walk past in the background. And he actually says in the video, did you see her too?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a creepy moment in the video. I mean, you're watching this video and who is this woman, right? You're on a space station. What the hell is this? And she just kind of pops into frame and pops out. Clearly, she's supposed to kind of stay out of frame while he's filming this. So that's kind of what I guess at that.
That makes almost sense. So it's almost again. So it's a past guest almost sort of before they leave existence. That's more interesting to me.
So since we're talking about the guest, there's this whole theme of what I think Solaris is most celebrated for and deserves all the respect in the world for is the concept of aliens. When you typically in science fiction, you head to cast humans as aliens, right? So you put a little makeup on them, you give them a horn, you put some, blue face paint on them, and we're done. Give them a weird costume, and there you go. That's an alien from Venus or whatever. And Solaris suggests that not every extraterrestrial intelligence is going to be not only carbon based, right? I mean, that's an assumption, but it is going to be even comprehensible to us that whatever intelligence it is will have evolved differently in a very different climate and could be very different in unimaginable ways. And in fact, ways that we might find unfathomable to the very structures of our brain. And so having aliens be like just like us, and like on so many shows like the Vulcans, right? You can just reproduce together, right? Like really, is absurd, and that's not a serious idea. And so Solaris suggests the aliens are really alien, and with that also suggests the limits of science, the limits of reason. the limits of what we can do. And so I think that even in the response by the other people on the station to Kelvin, um, part of their whole like nonplus thing is like Kelvin's coming there with, it's almost like the Crusader states, right? Where like somebody from Europe would get there and say like, all right, we're here to fight the infidel.
Yeah.
And, the people there are like, yeah, the infidel is my neighbor. And, we have lived side by side for 30 years. And, you're going to get it eventually. Just don't kill anyone in the meantime. There's this kind of like, Kelvin is coming in with that rational certainty. And he's such a certain man. He seems so confident. And the other guys are like, look, you don't get it. We have been face to face with the fact that we are not capable of figuring out the universe. Our brains, which evolved inside that universe, are not capable of figuring it out, and we are not going to, solve this. You have this rational certainty. Yeah, good luck with that.
No, that I have to say that was one of the ideas in this film that I latched onto and I really enjoyed, was the fact that this alien entity is literally, they refer, it's an ocean. It's a vast body of liquid, and they let you know, look, it's got a cerebral ability. Like, it's a thinking organism, and it's able to replicate, and it's trying to communicate, but it's so alien that we're not able to process its motivations, its form of communication, its existence, and we keep, even in this film, like you say, there's an element of, they try to apply again that sort of human logic to it. Of, what is it you want? What we're trying to do to it? Well, we're going to fire your brain waves into it using the radiated pulses and this other stuff. And so, but what would that do? What's the point? What are you trying to do? And I just love the fact, this concept of it just being so distant, that like decades of research and tens and tens of scientists haven't been able to sort of rationalize and crack what the hell this thing is. Yeah, I really dug that. It felt purely Lovecraftian in that sense of like, and not the cosmic horror, not this thing is going to come destroy us, but that idea of like, no, we're human, it's alien. Like, not only has it had evolution in a different environment, so it's talking from, it's coming from a different standpoint and reference point. Like, it's evolved, it's a completely different entity down at sort of a molecular level. Like, it's just different. I was really impressed with that, especially in this period in history, sort of being able to talk in those terms.
Yeah, I'm glad, and I feel that same way. I think it's really ambitious. And I mean, you compare this depiction, if this is a kind of like living planet, or at least the surface is covered by a sort of like slurry of sort of neural network, which it's not even clear, is that one being, or is that a kind of like mass of different organisms that work as one, like a hive does or something. I mean, we don't even know that. But you think about the difference between like this and other depictions of like a living planet like Mogo, and like, oh, I'm a living planet, like, give me that Green Lantern ring. I'd love to help you guys.
Yeah.
I mean, this is just like, no, we're this planet is completely alien. And I love the idea of like, okay, if it is completely alien, it's reaching out, it's trying to communicate, right? It doesn't know English, right? I mean, and it makes these people from the mind and of the people on the station. And those people it's fascinating, those people are imperfect in some ways. They know certain things that they shouldn't, and they don't know other things that they should. um, and I love the idea that if we do encounter an extraterrestrial intelligence, it is so weird and truly alien. And I'm not really as hopeless as I think Tarkovsky is of ever being able to communicate. But I have the feeling like this is a generational project, right? Like you guys back on Earth who just want this to work. Um, this might be a generational project as these guests are just made, and we they slowly accumulate data and get the guess right, and we slowly figure out what the hell it is they're trying to say.
Yeah,
And maybe we only communicate in these obtuse ways,
and
right?
yeah, because that was a couple of things. There's I mean, two things there. Is like, you know, Snout actually says later in the film, so they have a dinner party or his birthday party, and he actually says at one point, he says, like, humans long for contact, but when we get it, we don't know what to do with it. So, you know, we're being sent these guests, like, we're getting contact. This thing is trying to communicate with us. We just do not know how to sort of process it. And I just thought it was really interesting, this idea that, like, you know, we keep trying to make contact, but we can't do anything with it. And so almost like the Earth's almost given up. It's almost like, well, we can't do anything with it, so leave it alone. But I like the idea as well that the planet is actually studying us. So, like you say, this idea that, like, decades ago, the guests or these materializations were slightly wrong. You know, there was, like you say, there was a 4 meter tall child, or he says about when he saw the garden in the ocean, it cracked and it all sort of boiled away and all this other stuff like that. It couldn't quite get things right. It wasn't able to sort of represent, to fully interpret what we were coming from our mind. But decades later, when there's only a couple of scientists left, now it's able to project almost like an almost perfect replication of something from somebody's mind. So yeah, I'm fascinated to see, like, well, what's been the evolution of these guests? What was the first thing that showed up on the space station? What was it like to begin with? You know, was it sort of like an amorphous blob, or was it, you know, with something with a face, couldn't talk, couldn't do this? Like, have these grown? Have these evolved? Have they become more, you know, what's what I'm looking for? I suppose just more perfect, or, you know, better representations.
Right. Well, I mean, remember there's that line. I'm not sure if it's Snout who says, like, "Oh, she's sleeping already."
Yes.
Right?
Oh yeah.
You know, where it's like, oh, you know, like maybe the planet's getting better at making these guests. She just sleeps that first night,
Mm.
right? And the implication is that, yeah, the guests previously had to learn how to sleep. But you know, I mean, I love this sort of like these imperfections. I mean, if there's one shot in the movie that I think it just sticks with me, and it just is haunting. And there are a lot, but is the after Hari, his dead wife, has appeared, and she sort of appears really creepy, watching him as he sleeps. There's this sort of focus on him sleeping, and then, you know, you're not sure if it's a flashback or is she in the room, and then she's just sitting in the chair watching him, and it's so creepy. And she doesn't know that she's dead. She's concerned with mundane things like her shoes. You know, she's instead of like, I was dead,
Yeah.
right? You know, doesn't recognize herself in the photo until she sees her own reflection. But then he tries to get her out of her dress. And he takes the ties out, and when he removes the thread, right, the
It's
tie,
solid.
it's solid.
Yeah.
There's no slit between the two rings of holes. That stays with me. That haunts me. Like, you know, the aliens get, you know, the alien, right? I mean, even using that term is uncertain. This planet, this consciousness, has pulled these ties, can reproduce them from memory, but doesn't understand the point of them, right?
Yes.
Are they decoration or what? And that's so fascinating. My God.
Well, because there's two things. There's two things about that as well that I really like. Because she every time she materializes, because he will get on to what happens to the first guest materialization of Harry. She appears with a shawl, like a knitted shawl thing, and then when the second one appears, she comes with the same shawl. So it's obviously, you know, it's this thing of like, it replicates that, but the first one hasn't gone. And so it shows, it sort of zooms in on a shot, doesn't it, of like the two of them being draped over a chair, and it's sort of to show that this is obviously a second one. It's a rematerialization. So again, it's that thing of the planet is constantly trying. It's sort of picking out bits of thought and going to go, that's clearly important, and this and that, which is fascinating. But I also
I love that shawl shot,
yes,
right? I mean,
over the chair.
but I mean, you didn't mention that the reason why we need a second is because, you know, Kelvin sort of like freaks out and kills
Yes,
his wife.
that's what I thought. That was what I was going to say. It's almost comedic to me now. Like when I'm watching it, and he says, "Okay, we'll get in this spacesuit. You know, here you go," and he takes her out to the pod, which I assume he arrived in. And he's like, "Okay, are you comfy? I'm gonna close the door. There you go." And then he jettisons her into space, and I was
Uh-huh.
like, "Wow!" Like, it's such a sort of of sort of just a reaction, like a knee jerk reaction. He's like, "Don't know what this is. Don't like it. Get rid of it." But I was like,
Well,
I didn't know what to do with that when I first watched it. I was like, "Wow, that's a really weird reaction."
no, I think so too. I mean, there is a part of me that sort of watches that and thinks like, wow, like I got my dead wife back, who I obviously love, and my first reaction is like, kill
Yeah,
her,
yeah. No
But
wonder she poisoned
but I
herself.
think that yeah, I mean, upon reflection, I mean, I think that he is just in such a state of
Mm.
shock. It's clear that he isn't thinking that he loves her so much. Once she comes back, he's like, okay, I can't kill her. It doesn't work that way. Um, but it seems very impulsive. It seems just like this is a horror.
Mm.
This is not right. Um, and she's fascinating. I mean, she's my God. The sort of the part one ends with her looking at him and she says, "Why do you keep looking at me like that?" And you think, my God, because you're dead,
Yeah,
right? I mean,
yeah.
how do you say it? I mean, it's so
Well,
creepy and so fascinating and so much of a sort of like encounter with something you can't understand in space, the mind staring at itself in the mirror and reeling in
Well, the
horror.
thing as well that to realize is not only is it his dead wife, it's she's actually materialized in the clothes she was wearing when she died. So
Yes.
there's a rip in the sleeve of her dress that's not a dress for a while. Like she sort of they don't talk about it for a while until he explains like how she killed herself, and she actually injected herself with
Mhm.
poison, and she'd obviously torn it. And he says like all that was left was like like a pock mark on her arm, and he says, "Oh, like this," and you realise that yeah, the reason he's so freaked out is like she's literally materialized as he last saw her when she died. So it's no wonder that
Yeah.
reaction was so aggressively sort of like just get out of it. I can't deal with this. Um, which again sort of like makes it more interesting in the sense of like the planet hasn't gone and gone, oh, here's your best memory, like she hasn't turned up in a wedding dress, or here's something that you wore on your favorite when you went out for a date, or your favorite meal, or a beach, or wherever. Like your memory, your last burning memory of this person is the moment you found her dead, which is horrific.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing that I find fascinating is that the planet has reproduced her with all of her failings, right?
Mm.
I mean, this is not like I mean, I always imagine like later, or I guess it was earlier, Star Trek episodes where like oh, the alien makes women appear, and of course, Kirk has sex with all of them, but the aliens are like, I can grant your wishes. Look at these women. Um, you know. Uh, I could bring your dead wife back, a shape changer or whatever. Here, the dead wife comes back, and she has all the psychological flaws that the wife
Yeah.
has. So, what's initially he kills her, and then in horror, and then when she comes back, I love that Snout says after he finds out he killed her, Snout's just like, oh well, he's totally nonplussed by that either, and he's just like, well, next
Yes.
time,
Yeah.
just get out of the room before the rocket takes off, so you're not
Yeah.
injured. Just be cooler as you're killing the next one. Like I've been through this, man. Um, but I love that Hari has she comes back and ultimately that second version commits suicide too in a different way, and it's frustrating. And there's this kind of like haunting idea of um, somebody who keeps killing themselves is a depressed, suicidal, damaged person who keeps killing themselves and can't die and keeps coming
Well, that's the
back.
thing that really struck
Um,
me. Yeah, is that like there's one moment where he comes out onto the corridor to speak to Snout, and um, much like when we first met Sartorius and the child beat on the door and he was let out. Like whilst Kelvin is speaking to Snout, she pounds on the door and eventually breaks through it. In doing so, she actually is injured. Like her arms are all cut and her hands are all cut. Um, and the weird thing with this film is, like, when they tend to the wounds wash off. So it's like
mhm.
like you say, she's human. She looks human. She bleeds, but she's not quite perfect. Like the wounds just sort of wash off. They're not. They are literally skin deep. And then when she tries to commit suicide later on, she drinks liquid oxygen. And so when you see her first, like she's frozen, she's fleeted, and it brings her back, and she's choking and coughing, and like she's really struggling, and it's
Oh.
horrific. Like she's literally sort of saying like, what? Why can't I do this? Like I'm trying, I can't. Why can't I process this? And you can see he doesn't know what to do with it either, because it's so hard to sort of try and comfort someone that you're not entirely sure is human, but he's clearly going through an emotional reaction to having tried to remove themselves from existence. It's yeah. I have to admit that it's
Yeah, and
quite hard
also,
watching.
yeah, and also, I mean, the pain that that she seems to be going through as she's brought back. I mean, her body isn't, like you snap your fingers and it's back to pristine condition. It's sort of repairing itself, and those spasms are so horrific. I mean, okay, so the actress who played Hari just steals the show.
Mm.
I mean, everybody has Russian names. I'm not going to
Yeah.
butcher them, but she steals the show. Tarkovsky knew it. Everybody knew it. In fact, the real actress, apparently had a love affair with Tarkovsky, where it was one of these things where Tarkovsky kind of fell in love with a character, and apparently when he broke it off, she tried to commit suicide in real life. So I mean, like,
Well,
but she is. I mean, she steals the show. She is so brilliant, and her spasms as she's reviving and sort of not able to breathe are brilliant.
yeah, I have to admit, she is, yeah, the strong one. She is a standout in this film. She's absolutely excellent, and uh, it's like you say, she gives a speech later on. They have a party for it's Snout's birthday, and sort of Snout and Sartorius and Kelvin and she are there, and Harry are there, and Snout gives all this stuff about these sort of things, as we said before, about we try to make contact and we don't understand it. And then he says about sort of why do we reach out to other planets and we don't really know what we're going to do with ours. And he sort of makes all these sort of like, there's a whole monologue with all this other stuff. And then he talks about being human and what it is to be human. And she sort of comes back and she says, well, I'm human. Like I'm here. I'm sort of like, I feel deeper than you do. And I'm trying to process this and I'm struggling. And it's, again, the way she sort of does it, it's really sort of it resonates in that fact of like, she is, as you said, still struggling to patch together what it is to be human. Like the human condition to her is still almost like a work in progress, but she's having to deal with all this really heavy baggage. Like it's the training wheels have come off pretty quick, and it's really sort of you think, yeah, like that. It's no wonder you're struggling with this. Like you say, she's clearly got some sort of psychological problems, and then you've got to deal with the fact of like, yeah, you're not the person you think you are, and she's having to deal with that. Like yeah, it gets quite,
Yeah, literally later on, she says, "I'm not me."
yeah,
My God, I mean, it's so paradoxical. And I mean, you're right to isolate that Sartorius's birthday party where he gives that sort of speech, which I take as representing Tarkovsky's views about the limits of
mm,
genius, and we don't really know what to do if we did contact other worlds, and it's a kind of like focus on the here and now kind of thing, which I don't love in science fiction, but okay. Um, but I was going to say that I mean Hari's depiction, that sort of like I'm not me, but she's not human,
mm,
right? I mean she is a replicant, and I wanted to say that like for all of the good press, we're going to talk about Blade Runner later. For all of the adulation that Blade Runner gets, and I love that movie, And it gets primarily for, besides its style, its depiction of replicants, its depiction of an artificial life form sort of struggling with what it means to have been created and have these limits, and to be made in a human image yet not fully human or whatever. But the truth is, in Blade Runner, they don't really struggle with it that much. They go on a rampage. They talk about having seen the stars as they die. But the love interest in that film was, again, for me, the most interesting character. She finds out that she's a replicant. She doesn't like go through an existential crisis. Her response is like, "Oh, let's have sex with Harrison Ford. That'll solve it."
Solves everything.
Here in well, I mean, that's what I do
Yeah.
every time I get upset. I email Harrison Ford. But I mean, I think this movie does such a better job of the replicant thing, of having Hari really deal with, my God, I'm not, I have these feelings. I am not her. I'm not Hari. I'm something else. And I don't know how to understand this. I don't know. I don't recognize myself in the mirror. I don't have I am not this person. I'm jealous of this person in a way. But I mean, there's this wonderful bit after she comes back where she says, to Kelvin. Kelvin is so happy to have her. And she says, how could you have gone on without me? She's learning what this means to be in love. And, how could you go on after my death? Right. And he says, yeah, I thought about you, but not all the time.
Yeah.
And then only when I was sad. Oh, God.
And that's a really, but it's such an honest response. And I think that's the thing about it. It feels honest. Because again, if you were to sort of Hollywoodize this film, or they'd romanticize it, and they'd be like, "I was heartbroken for decades," and all this other stuff, and I've now got a tattoo of your face on my arm, and all this other shit. Like, it's not that. It's like, yeah, I grieved for you, I did, but I mean, I don't know if you know how long it's supposed to have been that she's. I think it's supposed to be like 10 years or so, isn't it? Because
yeah, it's 10 years.
So he's like, yeah, I grieve for you, and I still do think about you, but I've had to carry on, and that sort of thing, and it feels honest in that respect, that it's not, I loved you, and even to the fact that it's acknowledging that even when she was alive, that their relationship wasn't some sort of Romeo and Juliet, some sort of like idyllic romantic vision. It was like, oh no, they had a relationship, they loved each other, but it was never always sort of picnic and rainbows. Like, they clearly had problems. And
She's depressed. Yeah. She's suicidal. I mean, she not only killed herself. I mean, he left without her, right? She didn't want to go. He was willing. The implication is he was willing to have her come with him, and she said no. She said, "I don't want to leave." He was relocating for work, and she killed herself. When she's resurrected, he kills her. She kills herself. She tears herself up trying to get through that door. And, it becomes like before she disappears, she's destroyed off screen. Before that happens, like in the birthday party scene, I kind of get the feeling like she's not just his imagination anymore. I mean, she is standing up for herself. She's defending herself. She's kind of come into her own. And I love that, like you said, I mean, there's no Hollywood cliched love story. In fact, there's that great line at the during that birthday party at the end where I think it's Artoria says, "Don't turn a scientific problem into a common love story."
Yeah.
But at the end, when Kelvin finds out that the other scientists have conspired to kill her, his reaction is he loves her. I mean, he would keep her alive if he could, but his reaction is to say, "No, I don't want her back. I don't. Don't worry about it. I mean, it's better off. I don't want her back." again, I mean, that's shocking.
Yeah, but again, it's that thing, isn't it? It's honest. It's that thing of like, again, the Hollywood thing would be like, no, I've got to sacrifice myself, and I'm going to travel into almost that sort of Dante's Inferno thing. I'm going to travel through hell to bring back the one I love, sort of thing. In this, he's like, no, I've gone through that pain. I've dealt with that. Like, I've got to carry on. It's easier. I'm going to be honest. It's easier for her not to come back. And
Yeah, and it was a messed up relationship, right?
it's
I mean,
honest.
it's
Yeah,
clear.
and
Right. I mean, look at how many relationships are like that, right? I mean, she killed herself.
and that's the thing. I think it's a self-destructive. It's a destructive relationship, and it's not. It's not a. You say it's not a Romeo and Juliet story. Or that's probably a bad example, to be fair, but it's not a clear-cut, love story. This isn't going to end in a happy ending. It's not supposed to, and they almost have to be taken apart, separated for at least one of them to carry on. Because I do like this idea that sort of like you say, at one point when Chris Kelvin has his sort of like a bit of a, not so much a breakdown, I suppose, but he has his moment at the end where he has a bit of a sort of a bit of a break, and he says something actually which really sort of struck me, was this idea of philosophy. And he says you look at philosophy and you look at all these great things, and this idea of looking at the nature of being and existence and all this existential stuff. He says, really, a happy person doesn't look at that because you're happy. Like that, for you at that moment, that is the nature of being. That is the nature of existence. To be happy, to be content, to be. He says, you only look at these greater questions when you are sad and when you are, depressed or. And he was like, so it's that thing again of sort of like, if I'm asking these questions, really, then I'm clearly not happy. So I've got to do something about it. But it struck me that point of, really, philosophy is an existential questioning. Is you wouldn't ask those questions if you were happy.
Yeah, and again, it kind of gets back to the beginning with nature and the horse. I mean, presumably that horse does not ask those questions, right? Presumably that horse is as content as anyone else, and certainly in the modern Western world, we sit around and ask these questions, and we watch movies like Solaris and Blade Runner, and and make podcasts about what's going on in them and what's the meaning of life, and and art, and one may well guess that horse is happier than that agonizing individual, certainly happier than Burton as he's in the back of a car being driven through a concrete landscape, remembering this horror that happened all these years ago. And again, maybe this is like the limits of knowledge, the limits of science. What are we doing all of this for?
Yeah, well, that's one of the questions that sort of I found was really interesting. I'm going to quickly check the notes. It was this idea of why. There you go. Studying the planet. And I've just put, is the search for knowledge enough, or does it need a point? So do you need a purpose for studying knowledge? So they've been studying this planet for decades, and we always study things and go, oh, you've got to understand the nature of the universe and all this other stuff. And you sort of go, well, why? And you go, well, we just need to. And you go, okay, so is it just the pursuit of knowledge is enough? Or do you need to have a purpose then? Does it need to further us in some way? Like, if it doesn't further us, is there a point to it? And it sort of feels a bit like, if this planet, like, if it's not going to gain them anything, do they need to be studying? It's almost like they've given up on it. But I like that question of, should we just be furthering for the sake of knowledge, or do we need to give it a context?
Well, and I think this gets back to what Tarkovsky was trying to get at, of previous science fiction being about the technology, and this is being about the human condition. I do have to say, though, that I am I think I have a solution to this quandary, and I think I'm also bothered by it in science fiction. I mean, I would say personally that I am an animal, and that I cannot stop philosophizing. I cannot stop watching art. I am happier and more functional when I see beautiful art, and art that makes me think, and art that moves me. It is a salve for for lack of a better term, my spirit. And maybe this is just how I am made. I cannot be a horse. I seem to be an artsy fartsy intellectual. Let's be that, because that I can't not do that. I was made this way. So you can be that. You can do that without sort of surrendering all concept of nature. But I have no illusion that I'm going to realize the eternal truths of the universe. I don't believe there is an end in mind to these philosophical quests or artistic quests. I don't think there is a goal. I think it's just how I was made, and I can't stop doing it. And it is an obsession, and it is ultimately no more meaningful than any other human endeavor. But then there's the issue. But then, contrary to that, I have this problem with sci-fi. I recently saw Ad Astra. And Ad Astra does one of the, I mean, it's a horrible movie, by the way. It does one of the things that I really hate in sci-fi, which is ultimately none of this matters. What it's really about is your loved ones and the people close to you, and the life around you. You can journey to Neptune, but you're gonna come back and just hug your woman close, and 2001 doesn't do that. Other stuff doesn't do that. I think Interstellar does that a little bit. If that has a weakness, it's the kind of like the power of love.
Yeah, that's where I got off that film, to be fair.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, but so I think I do have an intellectual problem with this film, sort of being a sci-fi film about contacting extraterrestrial life and ultimately saying, none of this matters. What matters is this human stuff. I don't know that I disagree with that, but I also think we are made to find new continents and to sail the stars and to contact other life. If there is other life out there, why the hell are we sitting on Earth? We should be contacting it. I mean, to me, even if it takes generations to figure out what the hell it is and how we can communicate, to me, science fiction is a calling and is pointing toward a direction for the species. It's not simply a metaphor for our limits. And I can accept that, but I do have a problem with it, less so in this film than others, but I do. Sorry.
No, you're right, and it's a wonderful point to make, because I think you're right that one of the problems that, and it happens in everything. Every time we do a science fiction film, we always come back to this notion of humanity, what it is to be human. And so, you say, even when you go off into the most alien of things, like you say, there's you had it right with Star Trek. What is this Earth thing called kissing? It's sort of like, that's the. Do you know what I mean? It's like, well, that's the best way of communicating that I'm attracted to you. And they go, oh, okay. Well, what we do is we punch each other, and you go, oh, well, that's your. It's this idea of sort of the difference, but we have to keep bringing it back, I suppose, to a reference point that we can understand. I suppose it's sort of like a storytelling technique, or at least a film point of, so what's your reference point? What is your reference? So I saw something recently. It was on literally just scanning through YouTube, and someone said to me, if a lion could talk, you still couldn't communicate with them, because their point of reference is so different to ours that even if they could speak English, like, you just wouldn't be able to communicate with them. And I think, when you think, okay, take that and now take it off our planet, to some extraterrestrial thing, then again, like, that communication, that contact is going to be 1,000 times more difficult. But we seem to keep inserting this idea of humanity into, or at least be assumed that this more intelligent extraterrestrial life form is going to be able to communicate to us, or have a message for us, whether it be, Jodie Foster's dad appearing in Contact, or Amy Adams talking through circles in Arrival. Those sorts of things. It keeps going back to these human concepts, and at some point you sort of think back to, I go back to Lovecraft quite a bit, but there are stories he's done where you come back to these things of they're just alien. Their concept of reality and existence could be so far removed from ours that contact could be like literally impossible because we just could not make that connection. And this sort of comes close to sort of getting to that point of removing the humanity and saying there's something there, and yeah, we should study it and we need to look at it. But you know what? Trying to talk with it is gonna be impossible.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that when you were talking about these other science fiction films, um, part of the problem isn't just that they are focused on the human; it's that they constantly lionize the human and make the human the central point,
Mm.
right? I mean, if you're Data on Star Trek, why the hell would you want to be
Yeah.
human, right? I mean, I have no interest in being human. I want to be Data. That sounds a
Yeah.
lot better. Um, you know, these aliens are always like, oh, human culture is so
Mm.
fascinating. They never say, yeah, you guys are kind of ants to us. Your little ritual of squirting some pheromone as you salute the queen, like it doesn't really interest me as a human being. You know, there's this way in which being human is always so lionized, and the aliens are always so interested in that. And of course, that isn't reality. I mean, everything we know about the universe is that anthropocentrism has always
Mm.
been wrong, right? The idea that, um, you know, humans are the focus of the planet, right? We were made in God's image, and, Earth is the center of the universe, and, the sun orbits around the Earth. All of this is wrong, as is, I'm sure, the idea that we're alone in the
Mm.
universe and all of this massiveness was made just for us in an unimportant arm of the Milky Way. Yeah, right, man. Um, but, so I am irritated at this kind of like, isn't it fascinating? The human mystery, the mystery of the human condition. Why is it more mysterious than a horse?
Mm.
I don't know. I mean, obviously, this movie does want to explore the human condition. But I think that, um, you know, that human condition has a lot more in common with that horse than it does that alien surface of the planet.
No, it's true. I mean, it's that thing again. It's that reference point, isn't it? Like you say, there are alien. There are things that we would consider alien right here on Earth that would are just as elusive and just as sort of confusing as that ocean being on that planet. Um, yeah. I mean,
I want to talk to a squid. I want science to invent a device, where I can talk to a squid. And, I mean, as you say, I mean, I mean, it doesn't have a concept of air and breathing and, nothing. I mean, it doesn't even have it doesn't even have a brain, right? I mean, it has an electrical system, but it does not have a brain. How do we even understand that? And that's on this planet. Obviously, there's no brain on goo swirling in the
no,
oceans either.
they call it a cerebral substance, don't they? So it's clearly like a massive cortex or some sort. Yeah, it's so alien that that's what's so fantastic about it. It's
Okay, so you want to talk about the ending?
Yes, I do want to talk about the ending. So the ending is two parts. So as you said, sort of like so Harry is removed from the picture. Now I wasn't clear. Does she kill herself eventually, destroy herself, or is she destroyed?
Well, both. Has requested. Basically, Kelvin gets
Yes.
sick, right? And he seems to have this hallucination of multiple Harrys, and there's a dog on the station, and that seems to be a hallucination.
Is that his mother, by
And
the way? I
when
assume
he
that was his
wakes up,
mother, like some sort of hark.
yeah, I
Yeah,
think
it's
so.
never made completely clear.
But yeah, and so when he comes to, and he's sort of come out of this sort of fever, he's told, yeah, Harry's dead, and she requested that the other scientists use this thing that they've been talking about that will disrupt
Mm.
neutrinos, and these guests are made of neutrinos instead of our usual atoms, our usual protons and electrons. So it's sort of like, I mean, I imagine if they had the budget to film it, it would be like Dr. Manhattan,
Yes,
right?
being
Like
taken
she goes into this thing and they take her apart physically. Is
Yeah,
that what you pictured?
that was what I thought. Yeah, I wasn't sure. Like when they explained it, I was like, oh, okay, that's what I thought it was, but I wasn't quite sure. But yeah, now you've cleared it up for me.
Okay, so yeah, so she's gone. She's out of the picture.
Yeah, and then so as far as I'm aware, he basically goes. So then it sort of cuts to him walking the garden, and you see the um walking by the wall, and you see the cabin, and he walks up to the cabin. It's the long shots are back, the water's, the foliage in the water's back, and he goes through, and the house is leaking. And he sees his uncle, and his uncle gets wet, and they sort of communicate. And then you see that this is on the planet. That right? Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So let's back
Yeah.
up. Okay. So I mean, I know this is an ambiguous ending. I mean, people struggle with it. I've struggled with it. Okay. So just to back up, as after Hari has been killed, right, or the duplicate 2 or 3 of Hari has been killed finally. Um, a few things have happened, right? This projecting of the encephalogram to the oceans has caused another shift in the planet's attempt to communicate, and one thing is that two things are happening. One is it's no longer resurrecting the guests when they die, so the guests can just be killed, and it's not trying to communicate in that way
Right.
anymore, right? Okay, interesting, right? It's like a puzzle. Put it together. Then the second thing is it's building islands on the surface of the planet. Islands are forming on the surface of the planet. There's never been land, right, on the that we know of on the surface, but these islands are forming. Presumably, this consciousness is creating them. And then the last time we see the station, Kelvin is kind of debating whether or not to go home, right? Like the mission's over. He's totally
Yeah.
uninterested in like his original mission, right? But it's just like, should I stay here? Should I go home? What does that mean? What should I do? And the other scientists kind of encourage him to go home. And then you cut to what you're saying, him on the planet. And again, okay, so a few things. When he's back, he's apparently back at the cabin, and it's winter now, right? So the winter contrasts to the summer of that
Yes.
early sequence, where everything was lush and green, and now that same lake is frozen, and now things kind of look dead. And apparently that's his father in the cabin, and he goes up to it, and it's not that it's leaking. I understand like the confusion, because I have been confused at that too. It's that it's raining inside. It's raining inside the house.
So again, it's one of those
there's
one of
no
those
rain outside.
imperfections that the planet hasn't
Yes.
quite grasped how sort of meteorology works.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's another kind of dress that doesn't open between the ties. It's raining inside and not outside. So that, I think that's supposed to be your clue. Like, oh, besides it's winter, right? I mean, it's it's dead. It's not true nature, right? I mean, it's not this lushness. Here's this imperfection. And then Kelvin sort of drops to his knees as his father comes out, and he sort of drops to his knees and embraces him, and the camera slowly pulls out and keeps pulling out and pulling out as it's revealed. This whole thing is apparently on an island on the surface. So you're kind of left to wonder, like, what does that mean? Does that mean like this whole movie wasn't real? Was it, is this all like a simulation? I think intuitively.
Oh, is it? Well, no, because the thing that made to me is like, how long has he been on the station? And like you say, what sort of. I sort of, it was just bizarre to me. Like you say, it made me question what had gone before, but I was very much like, okay, so what does this mean for like Hari? So is Hari another Hari gonna turn up on the island? Is it, can Snout and Sartorius now come down? Is it sort of yeah, it just, I don't know, it left things open. I was
Yeah.
like, okay,
Well,
it was how, even to this extent, like if they're made by neutrinos, like, okay, well, how is he going to get sustenance? How is he? Is it just a visit? Is he going to leave? It's sort of, yeah, it was.
well, so I think I figured this out. I mean, I think kind of like emotionally, we imagine that what has happened is that Kelvin has gone down to the surface and he's kind of in this
Mhm.
simulation, right? Um, and it makes you kind of second guess what's real. But keep in mind, there's no evidence that you can breathe on the surface. Um, they're taking planes down. I mean, there's no, given how much care this movie takes with sort of presenting an alien, it's unlikely that there's an oxygenated, surface. Now, maybe the alien consciousness could make that, but there's no evidence that he would go down to the surface, or even that they have necessarily a ship that would take them down to the surface. Um, what I think has happened is that the planet has changed the way it is interacting with the humans. So it's no longer bringing the guests back to life. It's no longer interested in
Mhm.
communicating that way. However, it has the encephalogram of Kelvin. And what it's done is it's recreated Kelvin. That whole thing has been recreated from his memories. That Kelvin that you see on the surface isn't real.
Oh,
That is a guest. The father is a guest, and it's playing out the simulation to try to understand humans. That's what I think is happening.
oh, so he actually has gone home. You haven't seen it, but he's gone home. So this is, like I say, so this is again that consciousness taking that information and processing it, and again, like I said, well, so doing its own research, doing its own studying of these beings that have been observing it for so long.
Yeah, this is what I think is happening in the end. Now, I have no authority, but I think that is what makes the most
Yeah, that makes the
sense.
most
Is
sense.
that
That does make sense. Yeah.
in Yeah, it's in like
Mm.
stage three, right? Like stage one was whatever it was doing before the guest, and then there was this like guest stage after that. That pilot went missing, where it was communicating through these guests who were kind of like learning more, and now it's got that encephalogram. It's changed, and we're in stage three. And stage three is like it's creating these little petri dishes, where it's watching, you
Yeah.
know, these replicants interact in an imperfect environment.
No,
That's my
that
guess.
that does make, to thinking it back in my head. That does make a lot of sense. That so actually, what you're doing is you're, like I say, you're not actually seeing Kelvin on his like a final thing. You're actually seeing the story of the astronauts is over, and it's almost like it's a planetary epilogue. So you're almost getting an epilogue of like, okay, well, their story's over. He has gone home. He's obviously a very different person now. But and just so you know, yeah, the planet of Solaris is now actually processing this information. It's now processing this story that sort of happened around it, and it's continuing its own research. I really like that. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, that's my interpretation, and that's what I think it makes more sense than I think the first time I saw it, I thought, oh, he must have gone down to the
That
surface,
that was
and
my,
he's
yeah.
living.
That was my first. I
Yeah,
watched it and I was like, why did he go down? Like, how did he know? Like, that he could survive down there and that sort of thing. So, but thinking about it that way, um, because again, it was one of those where I kept flicking back and I was thinking, have I misread a subtitle?
yeah.
Have I missed something? So yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I've done the same thing too, man. I mean, I've tried to figure it out and contemplated it, and but it also it's also cool that like in 1972 there's this awesome
mm,
twist ending, right? Like now that's become such a cliche in Hollywood and in sci-fi movies, like um, that it's almost mocked, and boy, that's really a sort of twist ending. Maybe lessened a little by the fact that it's as likely to create confusion in the audience than
yeah,
anything. Um, but we don't really know whether Kelvin has gone home. Presumably he has, but is the if I'm right about this, and that's a duplicate Kelvin, just like it was a duplicate Hari, um, is that Kelvin on the surface?
Mm.
Right? I mean, it's like the replicant question.
Yeah,
Like
because
if we assume Kelvin goes back to Earth, he's going to
yeah,
die, right? And there's going to be like copies of
on
Kelvin,
this planet.
hypothetically, living out these weird, imperfect lives where it rains indoors, and everything's winter and kind of dead.
Because that's the really point then. So it's had that
On this
encephalogram.
planet.
So it's actually obviously looking at everything that was in. So the idea was they took basically a scan of or something of Chris Kelvin's brain, and they fired it down at the planet using these sort of radioactive pulses. So it's getting all the information from his brain, and it's playing these things, like I say, these little vignettes or sort of stage plays of his moments in his memory, really, or his experience, and um, so this is obviously, at some point there was this interaction with his father. It happened at winter and all this other stuff. But again, I like the fact that, like you say, that actually the story, it goes back to this idea of observation and study and knowledge and all this other thing again of, well, the story doesn't end actually. Like we've seen Chris Kelvin's story, and to be fair, like before you've seen a glimpse of it. There was Burton's story. He saw these things. He was ridiculed. It looks like he was kicked out of the military or whatever, and there was all these other scientists on
Mhm.
this space station, and you've had the first iteration of the guests and then the second iteration of the guests, and they've obviously all dwindled down, and you're not entirely sure why. Is it because of funding? Is it because people couldn't cope with having to deal with these guests? And then you finally get Kelvin's story. So it's almost like you say, it's and then the story continues on the planet. That you've now got this continuation of observation and research and knowledge building, but now instead of it being scientists observing the planet, it's the planet sort of trying to interpret these little pests that were sort of circling around it at some point, I suppose.
Yeah, and I mean, it's possible that the planet will reach out again. I mean, it's possible that they've talked about bombarding the planet with X-rays, and well, they sent out X-rays, which is what triggered the difference between like stage
Mm.
one and stage two. But there's this kind of like doomsday protocol where if we can't understand it, who cares if we destroy it? That's debated that of bombarding the surface with radiation. Um, and there's even this kind of discussion of, well, if that does kill this extraterrestrial life, we might learn something by watching it die. And at least then we'd know what the hell it was, or at least we'd have something to study, because right now we're nowhere. Um, so there is this kind of like idea that maybe science is potentially deadly. I mean, obviously, Hiroshima comes to mind, and this is 72, nuclear war, but also, it suggests that we don't know what the
Mm.
next chapter is, right? I mean, the planet might reach out, go through a period and reach out again, or there might be the scientists might decide, hell, let's bombard it, or the Earth government could make that decision for them and send new people out to say, like, look, Kelvin
Yeah.
failed, right? I mean, we can't get anything out of the Solaris station. Obviously, whatever's going on there is a not working, is a bust. Let's just bombard the planet. Let's see what happens. Um, so that might happen.
Yeah,
We
it
don't
leaves
know.
it open to there's so much there is like more story to tell, which is the great thing I think when you get great science fiction. It's not always closed caption. There's obviously more you can do, and there's even you said about these sort of like there are mini stories that you could be telling actually within this story, like what's happening with behind the closed doors of Sartorius's quarters and laboratory, or what's going on with Snout and other bits. So yeah, it does open up the world. It's weirdly a 2 hour 46 minute film, and yeah, it doesn't tell enough info. It doesn't tell enough story. uh,
Well, yeah, I mean, any movie that has characters having a party in which one of them angrily reminds somebody else that
yeah,
she's not real, I
yeah,
think I'm in
yeah.
love with. Um, so I mean, I love you, man. I'm glad that you saw this. Did I force you to endure um, extended pain? In watching 45 minutes of driving, and then this ambiguous
Oh,
ending, with that doesn't make any
I
sense.
will be about 30 to 40 minutes in, I was thinking like, what is this? I don't know where this is going. Like because I watched like a trailer for it's like, well, what's it? The trailer was very much sort of obviously showed this bit was the space station. I'm like, and I said like I'm 40 minutes in and he's still on Earth, like, and we're still at the cabin. So where what's going to happen? Um, so that I would say that first 40 minutes, that first 45 minutes is a slog. It's really hard to get through in that, for me at least it was, because it gives all this information, which is critical and it's really important, but it's told in such a way that I was like, there's better ways, or there's more modern, maybe it's just me, there were more modern ways I think this could have been told. When it gets to the space station though, and you start to sort of get to grasp with what is going on, and you're thrown into a different. So it takes a bit of a left turn, really. I was a lot more on board with this film, and you're starting to get into those relationships, and when you meet the character, and I honestly think like Snout is my favorite character in this film. Like I really like his sort of like just that offhanded sort of like everything, that shrugging of shoulders through everything of like, yeah, I've seen that, mate. I've been through this. Like I really liked him. I thought he was a really interesting character to sort of like I got through a lot of that sort of like midsection was a, I'm not gonna say a breeze, but it was a lot more interesting. And it, with the whole thing with Hari and sort of her dynamic of, am I human? What is it to be human? How do I deal with these emotions? How do I deal with these thoughts I'm having? What am I? That was really interesting to me. And then that sort of third act, that silent finale where he has his little bit of a mental break and stuff. It was so, again, seems to come out of nowhere. And then that ending, and I was a bit like, oh, I'm back to the beginning. I'm not entirely sure what this is. And
Right. No, I think that's fair. I think all of that I experienced too. I mean, I do think that you could cut 20 minutes from that Earth business.
Mm,
That's Tarkovsky. I mean, he likes that stuff. You could get the essentials in half that time. Um, I do think the ending, that last whole business, I love the ambiguous ending, but I think that the ending, with him getting sick and everything. I mean, I want to
yeah,
see Hari die. There are some things that, like, even just the travel to the space station
yeah,
is so lame. Um, I want, and this is why I could kind of see that you would want to remake this. I mean, this movie is just lionized. I mean, it is revered, um, and I think it's revered because of the replicant thing, because of the alien. There's a lot to revere here, but you can see the limits. I mean, the space station looks like you had an unlimited budget. It
yeah.
is amazing, but the rocket, is okay, and the journey to the space station is not good, and
Well, weirdly,
not showing Hari. I
there's
mean,
so
there's
much
stuff
that
you could do.
there's stuff. It's there's stuff they've done on screen in camera, which is really good. Like you say, I liked the moment you see the space station. The reveal of it as he sort of arrives is really good. It looked great, and they've clearly put a lot of money into a lot of effort into that very short shot, and I think that's very impressive. And then you have shots of the actual ocean, and they've done some incredibly interesting things with colors, and they did it with the oil being poured into waters and all this other stuff to get these like really unique, alien-looking liquid um, shots. And I love that. I thought that was amazing because I was really, that sort of thing really fascinates me because I'm like, okay, how are they? I was like, how are they going to have this ocean not just look like they've put a blue filter over a picture of the ocean, you know? And they didn't. They've actually done something interesting. So I was like, oh,
Yeah.
that's really cool. So I was really into that. But then you say like key moments to the plot are just sort of like, yeah, it happened off screen. Ignore that. Don't worry about it. It happened off screen, and I feel a little bit cheated. Um, but then I knew obviously this came out, was obviously filmed in sort of 70, 71, around that sort of very early 70s. Russia was in a very interesting place at that point. You had I can't pronounce his bloody name. Brezhnev was the um, Brezhnev. That's it. Was at the the top of the tree. He was actually starting to clamp down on liberal thought and all this other stuff, and so the film industry was really just starting to pull back and start to go back to that sort of like almost Stalinistic approach. So a lot of the stuff it got away with it was actually it's more interesting that it got away with what it got away with than what is missing. So again, it's quite a feat. It's quite an interesting feat,
Yeah.
really.
But I think that, like even the fact that Hari's death occurs off screen, I mean, I think that is for me the more unforgivable thing
Mm.
because I care about her. I mean, she's the character, despite her not being real, quote unquote. I love the replicants, right? I mean, I hate humans. We see this over and over. I'm always on the side of the aliens. I'm always on the side of I'm on the
Yeah.
side of the Terminators in Terminator. Okay, I mean, I never side with the humans, but so emotionally, it hurts that we don't get to see that. And but on the other hand, that would have been such a melodramatic scene, or risked being. And this is such a muted movie in which a lot of what you're shown and not shown is interesting. So I mean they could have done like a weird teleporter thing of
Mm.
like and disappear. They could have done something like that. But I don't know. I mean, I find it ultimately it's an artistic choice of what you're shown and not, and I can live with it. I think it's a respectable choice. Um, I don't think that it's just a limitation of the movie, but there are choices that I would make differently.
Yeah, and I think some of it's obviously down to budget. I think, like you say, again, this comes down to the fact of saying like that. Obviously, the director isn't actually that interested in the technology. Like, he doesn't actually care how she was destroyed. More the fact of like, what does that mean for the character? So I can see that he's doing that for a reason. Um, but yeah, no, it is interesting. Is it a film I'll go back to? Possibly. I'm again. It's one of those. I think
Maybe
Yeah. I
10
need to
years.
gain some distance from it at first. I think. Um, but yeah, no. I think I'll tell you what. You said about influence, and again, I think this will speak volumes about my point of reference and yours. Um, when I watched this, there were two things that jumped to my mind as being a sort of uh, something that was clearly influenced by this. And I did think about Blade Runner and the Replicant, so I'm glad I'm glad you mentioned that. But to me, weirdly, my first thought went a little bit to Event Horizon, a 1990s horror sci-fi film with Sam Neill in this notion of something going off into space, being incredibly alien, and then us having to understand what it's trying to tell us or trying to do, and it being so sort of far removed from our point of reference. Granted, in that it's more about a hellscape than like a sci-fi uh, tristy on the human condition. And we may get there one day.
Right.
We may not. But the other one, weirdly, was again after sort of thinking about it, it took my mind to an episode of Red Dwarf called Back to Reality. And
Yes. I love
yes,
Red Dwarf. I don't think we've ever talked about it,
I'm
but
sure
I'm
we may
Red
have to
Dwarf
cover it on
is
the show at
amazing.
some point. But there's an episode of Back to Reality where they go to again an ocean planet, and granted they get attacked by the despair squid, and they then have to play out this notion of what would happen if they were these other beings. This notion of sort of their sort of sense of reality is broken. Like the cat becomes this stylish sort of narcissistic cat becomes this geeky dweeb Dwayne Dibley, and Rimmer, who's so proud of his sort of crappy, nonetheless militaristic career, becomes a bit of a hobo, and then sort of the hobo becomes a corporate bod, and so on and so forth. And Crichton becomes a policeman who actually ends up killing someone. Um, but it gives that question of being again, and like what it is to be you, and all this other stuff. And it sort of just took me to that. That was like, I'm not, I can't believe that Grant and Naylor didn't see this film when they were making episodes of Red Dwarf. Like, there's
Yeah.
clear influences, and that's just the one that sprung to mind. I'm sure there are more, but it's clear that they were very much embedded in this era of sci-fi, and it plays out in Red Dwarf without you even knowing it.
Yeah. And I think that that's how influence works. That you know I think to every time that I've seen aliens depicted as really alien, they don't have to be a ocean or something, like that. But you
Mm.
mentioned Arrival. They look weird. Their technology is weird, and we can't
Yes.
communicate with them. Now, that's not as alien as this, but that whole idea is grounded in Solaris. And as a science fiction writer, I think that, one of the things that irritates me the most is even if you have your aliens look like humans, maybe they're bipeds, whatever, the idea that they have the same
Mm.
morality as 20th or 21st century, not just humans, but
Yeah. Yeah.
Westerners, right? Like, they're like, we respect the individual on this planet. This is ridiculous. And, it's enough that it's a coincidence that they're approximately the same size as humans and, carbon based and everything else. Like, do they really have to have, like, the same moral concepts? And I think Solaris serves for me as a kind of beacon to that just demolishes
Mm.
those depictions, those lazy
No, I
depictions.
agree, and that's what if I take anything away from this, the philosophy of the film would definitely make me think. I will go back and think over it, and I will, in my head, I will revisit this film. I know I will, but the one thing is, I take away, I really salute it for, um, like you say, that ability and the braveness of actually saying, yeah, this isn't about some carbon-based life form on another planet. This is actually about something so far removed from our understanding and point of reference that it couldn't be like literally more alien if it wanted to be. It's such a refreshing idea for me. So I say it's refreshing. I've not seen it before, but this comes from sort of like 40 plus 50 plus years ago, and I think that's fascinating. So no, I think it's it's a long film. It's a Russian film. Um, there are moments when I think I wish I'd watched it. No, that's it. There were moments where I thought I wish I could watch the English dub, but then I'm glad I'm not. But no, I think you're right. I think this is incredibly influential, and I am glad that I've seen it now. So
Well, um, next time we will have enough of this hoity-toity Russian
yeah,
intellectual shite. Yeah.
yes,
Um, we have
yes.
George
So we are.
Lucas
We're
and
going to be
Star
moving
Wars.
on to from really sort of from sort of a real intellectual sort of challenge. I mean, let's just look at how long this podcast has gone. Really, I think how much there is to talk about this. Um, to what a lot of people deem as the film that is the story of their childhood. In a galaxy, in a galaxy long time ago, far far away. We're going to be talking about Star Wars. Now, you should say the Star Wars or Star Wars: A New Hope or Episode 6, whatever you want to call it. Episode 4, sorry, so whatever you want to call it. We're going to be talking about Star Wars, that one. And I think it's going to be an interesting conversation because, well, we won't get into it, but Julian, you have some interesting views on Star Wars, and
Yes, and
yeah,
I've been public about them, and
we
we'll get
definitely
into it.
will. I think again, this will sort of go to our points of reference, and maybe you might change my mind. I don't think I'm not as hung up on the film as some,
Well,
but
I think we both always kind of come together. I mean, I think that even I mean, when we've talked about subjects before that I wasn't as keen on, you would bring me, at least 50% toward your view. And I hope that maybe that's happened a little on Solaris here, and that'll probably happen again on Star Wars. I don't hate Star. I mean, it is my childhood too. I mean, I had the Star Wars blankets growing up as much as
brilliant. It's going to be
anybody
an
did.
interesting conversation. But listeners, if you want to join the conversation, if you want to go off watch Solaris. It's available on several streaming services. I watched it on Amazon Prime. And so you can find it. There are, I think, actually a lot of it is on YouTube as well. There's a full length English dub available on YouTube. I'm not promoting. I'm not sure it's a fully legit copy, but definitely track it down if you want to try it out and watch along with us. And as Julian said, next episode we will be watching Star Wars and talking about that. And if you want to talk to us, come find us on social media. On Twitter in particular, we are at PodTimeSpace. And really want to sort of engage with you and see what you've got to say. So, Julian, this has been a fantastic conversation. I've really enjoyed this one, actually. This is for a second episode. I think this was a doozy.
Yeah, I agree, and I'm loving this. If the listeners are having half as much fun as I am watching these movies and getting to talk about them with you, Scott, then this is going to be
and we've got some fantastic ones coming up in the future. I think there's going to be some more highfalutin conversation and some more sort of just basically discussing who shot first. So we'll get that to the future. But for now, we'll see you soon.
There's something very important I forgot to tell you.
What?
Don't cross the streams.